Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Kate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
This is episode 49. We're going to be talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 2003. Don't be fooled. We're not talking about the original. Our next episode, which will be episode 50, we're celebrating, for some reason, by covering This Is the End from 2013. Why are we doing this, Chad?
Because it's my favorite movie of all time.
Because it's Chad's favorite movie of all time.
No, it's not my favorite movie of all time. But I think it is a movie that says things about a lot of the things that we like about the movies that we cover in an interesting way.
The only way I can think of it being appropriate is that it's the most bro-y movie I can think of that I've watched and enjoyed. And that's pretty much what this podcast is. It's like kind of bro-y, but I like it.
Yeah, it's kind of like a horror frat movie.
Yeah, that's
with
fair.
like a bunch of final girl dudes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, not at all. You can email us at whatthe@scarythoughts.org about anything you like, movies we should do or anything we should talk about for that next episode.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I've been enjoying the emails too. And don't be afraid about length. Everybody's always apologetic about their length. I just wrote an email to a podcaster and I wrote a long as fuck email. And I think it's, you listen to somebody for so long, like, fuck, I want to say this and this and this and this and this.
Yeah.
And it's so built up and you feel like you know the person and you just unload crazy shit on them.
Yeah.
So definitely don't be afraid to unload crazy shit on Scary Thoughts.
I love the long emails. The only thing is the longer they get, the harder it is for me to reply in kind or give it what it deserves. But I love long emails from friends and from fans.
Also, there are therapists out there too. You can, get a therapist and then write a shorter
No
email.
podcasts are enough. Why, who's this in our studio but Meredeath?
Hi.
Andrew Sheets, thanks for joining us again.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We're actually doing this. We're covering this movie because of you, because you said it was way better than the original.
I did.
And
did I say that exactly?
Sure.
Those were the words I remember.
That's what we remember. Whether that's true or not, I don't know.
Great. Yeah.
And it was one of those things that in our conversation and about the Babadook, for some reason, that's what really struck me. I was like, here's a person who has legit horror aesthetic bona fides, like somebody who your events are the only events I went out to last year.
Yeah.
Like I think I went out twice and they were both your events. And Halloween was so much fun. I mean, it's what you're doing is great.
Thanks.
And when I look at 2003's Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I look at it, I'm like, man, this is not great. And it made me think, am I now old or am I just not getting it for some other reasons? And that to me was interesting because I'm for sure being an older person now. It's happening to me at a rapid rate.
Oh, totally. You were referring to what Meredeath does, and we usually kind of talk about what we have to plug. Why don't we start with what Meredeath does? Do you want to tell our listeners?
Oh, sure. So myself and Jillian Narling throw Stereo Argento, which is a quarterly party at the Stud that's focused around horror movies, specifically the giallo genre. This year's formatting is changing a bit, so we're kind of keeping things a bit secret till we premiere in March.
Cool.
Yeah, so that is where you can see our shows. It's a night of drag, it's a night of performance, it's a night of celebration, different genres, different directors.
Yeah, it's super fun.
Yeah, and it's a high quality weirdo crowd too. I mean, it is awesome. Like just look at people, like people's like, you can kind of read people's patches and pens and shit on their jackets and stuff and be like, whoa, these people are into like totally obscure, weird, great stuff.
Totally.
Like, a whole crowd of them.
Yeah, it's like people that don't normally even attend that bar either.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll get some...
Yeah, some of my favorite parties are ones that happened at the Stud that aren't Stud regular
Correct.
people.
Yeah, totally.
Right? Yeah. I have something to plug really quick. I was recently on Topazoo's radio show on radiovalencia.fm. It's going to be archived soon. I'll put it in the newsletter that you can sign up for by going to scarythoughts.org. Top right corner. Give us your info. Keep abreast. And, oh, wait, do you have anything to plug?
You know, it's not anything I'm involved with, but our buddies over at Popcorn Piston and Vinegar, they have a film podcast, and they recently switched formats to where they used to be kind of like this rad ESPN Sports Center holiday nerd news show. Or not holiday. Jesus, my brain is so messed up. Nerd.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
I should tell our listeners that Chad has dived full on into the opioid epidemic and is super high on painkillers right now.
Yeah.
You are?
Because of
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. Was it collarbone in 4 pieces?
Yeah, I crashed my bicycle pretty hard and knocked myself out and destroyed my collarbone, and it has not been comfortable. Collarbone is one of the most annoying bones you can break.
But you still think good.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes here. Yeah.
So anyway, sorry. So popcorn, piss, and vinegar.
Yeah, so anyway, they have a new format. They're going deep into a single property, sort of like we do a little bit, except for I think they still retain a lot of their pizzazz. And there's just something about people from southern Louisiana that I think are fun and interesting, and I like their take on shit. And their Bandersnatch episode is great.
Yeah, like I kind of feel like I don't want to cover Bandersnatch because I listened to their episode and I think they pretty much handled it.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything.
I still haven't seen that.
It's fine.
Is it Black Mirror?
Yes.
Well, right, but is it a quality that we've seen Black Mirror at consistently?
It is, just real quick, I mean, to my mind, Bandersnatch is a not as good episode of Black Mirror, but the conceptualization that goes behind Black Mirror episodes is sort of manifested through its own technology and the way you interact with it. It's a great idea. I wasn't into watching it. I feel like the story itself didn't really grab me, and it kind of failed for me that way. Whereas every Black Mirror episode except one totally had me the whole fucking by the throat.
Right.
This one didn't have me by the throat. It was
it the
a
toaster
little
with
boring.
legs that didn't do it for you?
Yes, exactly.
Really?
Yeah, that's
that
the
episode
one.
was bad.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen it, but I definitely think a lot of Black Mirror episodes deserve their own feature.
for sure. Yeah. Bandersnatch is totally worth seeing, but you also have to invest the time in watching several iterations of it. Like, it doesn't actually get interesting until you choose many, many, many adventures and see all the different versions. If you just watch it through once, it's a choose your own adventure, right?
Nope.
Okay. So how about we not do a Bandersnatch episode? Let's just cover it really fast.
Anyways,
Bandersnatch,
thanks for the recommendation.
it's on Netflix. It required new technologies to make happen, and it's a choose your own adventure, literally.
Okay.
You're watching it, and the main character gets a choice that you choose.
Right.
Do you do this or this? And then it proceeds from there, and it keeps going, and all these twists and turns. And then you get to the end, and you can choose a different path if you want. Like, it's generally about 90 minutes average if you just kind of blast through to the end. But then you can go back and choose a different route and see a completely different movie. And I found it doesn't get interesting until you see many, many different kinds of endings. They all tie together in this really fucking weird way, and that's kind of cool. But it's not engaging as a thing, unfortunately.
It's more of like a thing you have to like helicopter view and see.
Yes.
that it was really smart altogether. But
I would say
so
that, yeah.
one of my favorite, and this is going to make me seem like I just have like terrible taste in horror, but because we're covering Texas Chainsaw Remake and
You're already on the
Final
losing side.
Shut up. Final Destination 3 is probably my favorite.
I just watched 5 last night.
Oh, 5 is good.
5 is my favorite of all of them.
We need to fist
Okay.
fight? I don't know.
Later.
It's not. But Final Destination 3 is... It's so funny. I wanted to bring that franchise up during...
Is that the roller coaster one?
It is, yeah.
It's really fun.
But when the DVD came out, you also had the opportunity to like choose something. So like the tanning bed scene, it's like, do they turn the thermostat up to 72 or 73? And if you do that, then it like completely changes. I mean, they still die, but like it still like changes how they die.
That's pretty good.
Or like Clue, right? Wasn't there alternate
Yes.
endings to Clue?
Yes.
I don't know. I think that's a good format.
It's fun.
But we're not talking about Bandersnatch.
We are talking about Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 2003. Spoilers. That's your warning. Okay, so where do we want to start? I feel like it is a given that this is a bad movie, so maybe it's on you to start to convince us. That's not how law and debate actually work. They usually work the other way around, but I feel like the onus is on you to mount a
Cheerlead.
defense.
Yeah.
Before you get into that, I will say that I do not think this is a bad movie. And
I think it's a perfect movie
upon
for what
watching
it is.
it a few times. And I think if you were to say what is an early to mid 2000s successful horror movie, you would be fair to name this in there. But because of the franchise it's from, like it just demands a comparison, and I think it fails in the comparison. That's kind of like my high view.
I was also thinking about it, like, what even is the Texas Chainsaw franchise? Because you have the first one, right, which is so, like, it's just bones in the middle of nowhere, and you're stumbling across, and you're dying, and it's awful. And then you hear about, like, how the movie was actually made, and it's all just, like, you're actually in the middle of Texas. And then the second one comes out, and it's much more campy. Third one comes out, it's drag. And then this remake comes out, and it's, following this like early 2000 formula, very much so. But then you get like this other remake that came out just maybe not so recently, pretty recently.
There's like a prequel to this. And
Yeah.
then there's like
That's the beginning, yeah.
And then there's a 3D version.
That's the 3D one, yeah.
Takes off like right after the first one, the original ends, which is super weird.
Right.
And then there's some other shit floating around. I can't remember what it is,
Yeah.
but there's like a bunch of weird movies. And I think there's even some of the characters, like Chop Top Mosley's character, ends up in other franchises sometimes.
Really?
I think. Yeah, I mean, or like maybe video games or something like that.
Chop Top.
Yeah, but
I love that character.
yeah, that dude rules. I mean, he's one of the great things about like Rob Zombie's films, in which
Yeah.
I almost consider like a continuation, like at least spiritually, of like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But both like the original and this one have the same cinematographer, which I think is pretty interesting. So it's like, okay, so the look of the both films is like because of one dude, but there's like different constraints, and that is really how I started thinking about this movie, was like the constraints that it was under when it was made. Like I think it's kind of what's so cool about the first one. It has this really like punk rockish thing, and then
For sure.
this one you have everything in place, and now you can do whatever you want to with it. And then they did that.
And they did that. Yeah, it's not, as disgusting as the first one, but it's kind of more violent, or definitely more violent.
It's definitely more graphic.
Yeah.
Like there's more, like you don't see anything in the first, in the 1974 version.
Right.
And this one has way grosser stuff in it. Like just the girl shooting herself in, the head is a way more graphic thing than happens at any point in the original film.
So do we want to talk about remakes in general at all, or
I absolutely do. But before, I feel like I should defend this film and how much it means to me.
Yeah.
I just remember like sitting on the floor. So I'm going to be the millennial here.
Sure.
And I was sitting on the floor of our living room, like with my mom, watching maybe the Olympics, actually. If this came out in an Olympic year, that'd be great to look up. I don't know.
Well, 2003. I wonder.
Maybe an off year
Yeah.
for the summer games.
Welcome back from the break. I just took all of Chad's opioids. We were sitting in the living room, and this trailer comes on, and I had never seen anything like it. Like, I've been thinking about it because I want to talk about like 90s slashers and how that kind of formed the slasher genre in a new way. I mean, like you had Black Christmas, which originated it. You had Texas Chainsaw shortly afterwards. Yeah. And then into the 80s. But, you have your cast of 5, one killer picked off one by one. One girl has too much sex. One girl doesn't have any sex. Like one guy's stupid. One guy's kind of like stoned. And
That's me.
the character from Cabin in the Woods. We have that in the remake with Morgan, who's by far the best character in the remake. The guy who's hung by the chandelier. So it was like this trail, and maybe it was just like the way that the trailer was constructed, because it wasn't so 90s, and it wasn't even really a lot of the stuff I was seeing at the time that was like, in a world where he has a chainsaw, 5 friends are up to no good. Or it's just like, that like kind of creepy. It was just an editing technique that I had never seen before, again, because I was 12. But it just caught my eye, and I ended up seeing the movie and was just like, not only is this the scariest thing I've ever seen, but it's also doing something to my cells. It's like changing me as a person. It's making me kind of like hooked to this. It was like a drug for me. So from there, my horror interest just kept growing. So that's why I kind of have a near and dear relationship with this film. But I wasn't even going to rewatch it before this podcast. I was just going to be like, oh, wing it. You've seen it, 200 times. You don't need to watch it again. But I watched it today, and it's not good. It's not good. It's not at all good.
Sometimes though, there's a piece of art that is for you at that time. Like I just reread Lost Souls, that Poppy Z. Bright book, which I loved in high school. And again, not great. Like I don't know that I would recommend it to somebody, but like I read that book a gang of times, probably more than any other vampire book for sure. Mm-hmm. And it was just like one of the first books like that I ever read, and it's like your first love in something, and you'll always have like a place for it. And even though it's like obviously not perfect or whatever, but how long was it between seeing this movie and seeing the original for you? Like how long did you watch them close together? Or
no, years later I saw the original, and I'm not going to say I was like. It's funny to think about like pacing and how the original is just like a bit slower and never necessarily picks up. It's just kind of like this even tone that just has like these really brutal moments, but in like the new kind of formula they had to follow in 2003, it was just more exciting. But I don't even know if I saw the remake till I was like in high school, maybe early college, or the original. Yeah.
It's weird how like some movies like that you just don't see until like I didn't see Suspiria until like 3 years ago or something like that. It was pretty recent that I saw that, and there's still even now people. And now we have a horror podcast. People, did you see this? Did you see this? Like, no, man. There's like a million movies that I won't have time to see. Yeah. Like I haven't even seen any of the new Puppet Master franchises. I used to love that shit. There's like stupid little puppet horror movies.
Huh.
Yeah. Loved it.
Like the Leprechaun series.
Yeah, I liked the Leprechaun series. I used to love that. Leprechaun 4 is the best.
In the Hood.
Yeah.
It's good.
That's another thing. Leatherface has never been to space. There's always...
Jason has.
Leprechaun has.
Pinhead in space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, can you even call yourself a horror franchise until you go to space?
Well, it's funny. I don't think of the Chainsaw franchise as a franchise the way a lot of the other ones are.
Yeah.
Because it's not linear. There's no progression. There's there really isn't a sort of running out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 the way clearly Friday the 13th is. Like that's such a clear franchise, whereas Chainsaw has jumped around and the tone has shifted so radically every time, and there's so much time between all of them. Yeah.
But that's the thing. It's like, what is it then? And then you just, I guess, rely on the first one. It's just the first one. Like that's kind of like the core of Texas Chainsaw.
I sort of feel like there is, and this is getting into remakes a bit, that there's a difference, and it's a gray area, but there's a difference between purely capitalizing on the success of an existing property, whether it's you're doing a reprise or if you're just ripping it off. There's a difference between that and paying homage, paying tribute to, taking inspiration from something. And I know that's a very gray area. And this film to me feels so much like capitalizing on. But if you watch interviews with anybody involved, they're just all hot for the original and we wanted to pay homage to the original. But I have a really hard time seeing homage to the original. I feel like there are these reference points like, oh, they did the first kill is hitting over the head with a hammer and slam the door.
Yeah.
But that's not really homage. It was just sort of like a
copying.
It's like fan service, like Star Wars stuff.
Yes.
When you're like, oh, there's the Wookiee running around in the background, and you're like, oh, right. Or that's the whatever from the second movie, and now he has a speaking role.
Right. And again, it's all sort of gray, and I don't want to assume too much about the people involved in this movie, but it's hard not to attribute to them, I don't want to say bad intentions, I would say lazy or mediocre intentions.
I feel like they started it, though. I feel like they were the first to really kind of usher in this lazy remake horror.
Well, definitely applying MTV aesthetics, MTV millennial aesthetics to a previously existing horror franchise,
And then-
horror property.
And then like tuning up like the hot aesthetics from the original one, like 70s jeans from the butt shot towards the horror house is like a super iconic shot, and it is my favorite shot in horror movies. Like, it's one of the things I love about Rob Zombie's movies so much is like that his wife is basically there to serve that role in all of his movies. Like that like specific image. It's such like, I think what people would complain about like boys in the horror movies would be like, oh, it's just butts and boobs and chainsaws and shit. And this movie is all of that. And
I really have to say, and this is absolutely speaking from the position of being a straight dude, if it were not Jessica Biel in a wet white tank top
beater,
and low-rise skin-tight pants,
full support.
and she's wet through a third of the movie, if that wasn't true, what the success of this movie would have been, and if I would have even been able to make it through the entire thing. It was difficult to sit through, but that alone made it like, well, at least you get to look at her running around in a wet t-shirt. That's
funny.
something.
I had never thought of her as a sex symbol, being like gay as all hell, but
You missed out on something.
I mean, I had pictures of her in my locker, but that was just because, and I found this interesting too. I had photos of her in my locker, and I had photos of Eliza Dushku in my locker, and
Rad.
both in 2003, Wrong Turn,
Yeah.
and Texas Chainsaw Massacre the remake came out,
Yeah.
which are essentially the same movie. One is just quote unquote original, and one
Right.
isn't.
Right.
And upon rewatching it just today, Texas Chainsaw, there's a scene where Leatherface literally just turns the sprinklers on, and it just makes Jessica Biel more wet, and then he turns them off. And you're just like, oh, tight. Like, okay, yeah,
Done.
we just want her wet. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I think that scene is one of the scenes that made me like kind of start to like this movie a little bit more. One, just because I think that's a strong move from Leatherface, but two, it's super campy. I mean, it's like a really like thumbing your nose at the camera moment for this movie, and I thought it's just funny. It's a funny moment.
Yeah, they definitely try. I think in the follow up to this, which is actually the prequel to everything, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the beginning, like they are playing with this idea of how campy kind of the first one, a little like the dinner scene, which is so iconic, into the second one, which is ultra, into the third, which is even, beyond that. I think I forget his name, but whoever's cast as like the sheriff or the dad or whatever his name is, but
I never pronounce his name, but he's one of my favorite actors.
Hoyt?
Hoyt.
Emery? Or Lee Ermey, who was actually just laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery this week.
Really?
Which is pretty cool. Yeah, he was a legit Marine, and he was, most people know him from Full Metal Jacket. He's just the iconic drill sergeant.
Yeah.
And he plays like basically the same exact character in like a bunch of different movies. There's a movie called The Boys in Company C, which is kind of like more of like a Afrocentric Vietnam movie, and he's the drill instructor in that. And he's just awesome. He plays the same exact role, but he was a good character actor. He was like a TV history dude.
He really was. I think, though, in this movie, it gives me a bit of the Negan factor, which is
He's like too loud for his scenes.
Too loud for scenes and too much screen time. Like the thing for me with The Walking Dead, I feel like it's the last 12 seasons we're having to deal with this fucking character Negan, who's an amazing actor, an interesting character, and most episodes are just him yelling at people for like 40 minutes. And after a while, it's insufferable, and the character starts to get boring, and the tension lowers, and the threat is diminished because it's just too much. I felt like Bill Paxton just grazed that in Near Dark. Less is more sometimes, and I feel like his role in this movie, what's his name, the sheriff, it's just sort of relentless, and the tension goes down and goes down the more he's an aggressive asshole, and it becomes, I don't want to talk about realism in a horror movie, but he wasn't just sort of pushing them to the brink of cracking, because he walked in and just started pouncing on them and not relenting for the entire movie.
You know who would have been better in that role? And I love the actor that they have, but Michael Parks would have been better. He's the dude in Tusk.
Oh yeah.
But he plays like a sheriff like this in Kill Bill, and he has like you
Right.
could just see him being creepy and scary and holding that
the
tone.
David Lynch guy, the Pretty in Pink. He was the dad in Pretty in Pink.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I don't know his name.
I don't know his name, but I know who you mean. I can certainly picture him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do appreciate they at least tried to have this Joker character, this trickster of the dad that like is or is he Leatherface's dad in this movie? It's hard to tell.
I wasn't clear.
I wanted to, because he is,
And they steal the kid in this one
Buried
too,
now?
so it's kind of like
yeah. This actor is no
Yeah,
longer-
he died a few months
Yeah.
ago.
And I was thinking like, oh, we should make a joke about going and digging him up and skinning him and making lampshades out of him, because that's what this is all kind of referencing Ed Gein.
Yeah.
But that is something that they completely erased in the remake. In the
Ed Gein
original,
thing?
it's these, brother and sister that are going to see this grave that's been dug up. It's been, what's that called when you like deface something, whatever.
Desecrated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in this one, it wasn't about that. It's much more just like 20-something-year-olds being 20-something-year-olds going to Mexico to get weed, and now they're going to a Leonard Skinner
I
concert.
think one of my biggest objections to this movie, not as a watching experience, but as a why did they make the choices that they made, is they decided to keep it set in 1974. And, that's the narration.
Right.
Is August 18th, 1974, blah,
Here's some
blah,
footage.
blah.
Yeah, whatever.
There is nothing about this movie set in 1974. In fact, it felt incredibly 2003. Now, I'm definitely very sick of retro horror films, but it didn't serve that. And, Retromania was not in full swing in 2003. And I think the way people approach retro filmmaking now is obviously completely different than back then. But why was it set in 1974? And like their clothes weren't that vintage, and
Their facial expressions were even a little too like nuanced.
This is the movie whenever I say something like, oh, every single person in the movie is hot,
Yes.
and it takes away from the movie. This is the movie I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
Because it's like no one in the movie has an abnormal look. And that's one of the things that's so, I think, enthralling about the first movie is everybody's weird looking. Like every actor is just kind of a mutant. And it adds to the overall like Southern Gothic feel of this Texas madhouse. And this movie, because everybody's so slick,
Even the family?
I'd say even the family, they're like special effects scary. Whereas like in the original one, like the dude who cuts his hand is a mutant. Like
Yeah.
if you were standing next to that guy on the bar, you'd be like, ugh, this fucking guy.
Two things about that. One is when Jessica Biel is like hot wiring a car or picking a lock. I forget which. of the
Because she
two.
was in juvie.
Because she was in juvie. That person was never in juvie.
No, that person was on Seventh Heaven.
And the other thing is, I think what you're describing also applies to set design. Because if you look at, say, set design in the original, and like let's just compare to compare. You're immersed in the world of these characters. Whereas when you watch this one, you look at a movie with a set director who had a good budget and some time to make some cool shit. And I feel like that's very different. You're looking at like a bunch of hot people trying to be normal weirdos. The sets in this movie were beautifully crafted with a pretty decent budget to look fucked up, and they're like, no, that kid did not make that thing. That's a set dresser's idea of fucked up. That's not Leatherface's laboratory. That's a set dresser's version of Leatherface's laboratory.
Even the like in the first, we get like that room that's like you can't tell if it's a shrine or whatever. The figure that's kind of set up on the bed or the bench with all these feathers, and then in this one, it's just like not that fucked up. It's actually a really nice house with like a pretty clean kitchen. I mean, there's a couple pigs and a couple like fishnets like hanging from the ceiling, but it's not that bad. So there's also this kind of like everything has just been fine-tuned to a point where it's like maybe they spent too much time on this versus something like the original where it's just like it's 110 degrees outside. We're just going to go into this random ass house.
Yeah.
It's filthy. We're not going to have lunch breaks. We're just going to see what happens.
Yeah, set design, set direction is one of those things that I think no one ever really talks very much about, but it will, for me, it'll make or break a movie. I mean, when you think about the layered insanity of Seven, or even House and Fight Club, like another David Fincher movie. Like the levels, like when you're talking about characters who are insane and the set looks legitimately insane, like it was grown. I think it just adds so much. You see it again in the Childress's house in True Detective, the first season, like that weird serial killer house is just so layered and full of crazy hoarder shit, just nastiness. And I think it just adds like so much to a film, and you just can't make it overnight. Like it has to be almost grown.
Yeah. You can't just throw, like, before I rewatched the film, I was like, oh, it's so much darker. It's so much like the cinematography, everything, the lighting is so much darker, but it's kind of just like filtered. They kind of just like threw this like sepia kind of everything's either beige or kind of green or kind of gray. Like
I was skimming through making of, and I think I wasn't really paying attention, so this may or may not have been said.
Cool.
But I think they were talking about making the film look like the color of vomit, which
Success.
Oh, I love
which
that.
success. Yeah, if that's what they actually said, good job. But I was doing something else at the time.
Yeah. There were so many opportunities they had that I can see throughout the film that they kind of just glazed over to make this film exactly how they wanted to make it. And I do consider the remake more of a slasher than I do the first one.
Sure.
Yeah. It's definitely, it's following the rules more than like leaving it up to chance and leaving it up to surprise. We know exactly what's going to happen to these people.
Yeah, and I think that's why when you go to a horror movie, you know what's going to happen to these people pretty much, especially if you can tell early on if you're watching a slasher movie. But that is my frustration with, if you're going to refer to the original, you have to at least try to do something unique or try to do something better. And when Morgan gets hit over the head with a hammer, you can see it coming a mile away. It's like someone getting punched with a haymaker. Like, I'm going to wind up.
The first...
the first hammer blow.
boyfriend.
The first time Leatherface kills someone. That was Morgan, right?
It's not Morgan.
Oh.
I forget her boyfriend's name.
But it's already been amped up so fucking high by that point, as opposed to in the original. That just comes out of nowhere. Just like someone walks into a house, door opens, slam, door's closed, over. And it's really fucked up and really terrifying. And in this movie, again, you can do whatever you want, but it was an illustration of how if you ramp up tension too high in advance, the payoff is actually lower.
Totally. Yeah, like watching RuPaul's Drag Race, right? It's like these queens, when you can see that they're about to have a reveal in their costume, then it's not enticing. It's like, we know exactly what's going to happen. But like when they just pull a reveal out of nowhere, it's like, pah!
Especially when you go to drag shows up close and you're seeing it in person and up close, and you're like, I can see the Velcro seams.
Yeah.
This is coming off.
Yeah. But Drag Race is just at this level where it's like, oh, they're literally wearing a garbage bag because they have something underneath. And just like in the first one, the first death is just like some guy enters a house, trips, dies.
Yeah.
In this one, it's like this guy kind of like goes in looking for his girlfriend. There's this TV playing. Like he doesn't ever look over his shoulder. It's just like calculated.
I did, shortly after Leatherface is introduced, I did like the running through the air drying laundry scene. I thought that was actually kind of beautiful. Like that was
So
well
beautiful.
Shot, well thought out.
Also,
I thought that was a good kill.
So many bed sheets. Oh, how many beds do you have that you decided to clean them all on that one day?
I'll forgive them that. It's that thing of like, if it's cool enough,
Yeah.
you can forgive it, right?
That's probably one of the strong, I think that, the pepper death in the van at night with the chainsaw through the roof of the like I don't know what came first, Mad TV or that kid.
Alfred E. Newman?
Oh, Alfred E. Newman, Mad Magazine. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So that was
He's
around
like the
74.
mascot, from the maybe even the 50s and 60s.
What?
Yeah.
Mewery? Yeah, him.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, this film did some good things and
Yeah.
some good deaths. What's our favorite death?
I like the idea of someone shooting themselves in the head, it opening a perfect circle through their skull cavity, and then the camera pulling back through that and then through the window. I thought the whole thing of her shooting herself was a bit forced, but I thought that was a good device.
Yeah. I think that was fine. And the only thing I ended up resenting about that character was when, in the end, Jessica Biel just kind of like completely reverted to that same role where she's finally picked up by the semi-truck and she's like, I just want to go home. It's like, no, you were just coherent 5 minutes ago. Like,
yeah. It's the equivalent of, for me, in horror movies, when someone is running and they trip and fall to add to the tension. But when was the last time you were running and fell? Like, it doesn't actually, and I know if you're running from someone with a knife, you're likely to, probably more likely to be clumsy when you panic. But it's pretty much every horror movie has someone, usually a woman, running and falling down. And that sort of coming unglued on and off, like this toggle switch, is super frustrating as well.
Yeah. You know why I never trip when I am running from a killer?
Tell me.
I don't run. I'm not good at it.
You got to fight back.
I think, I'm not trying to be like 74 is way better, but I prefer how the weirdo dude brings them into the story more than the girl brings them into the story. Like, I think I like that he's introduced as a character. He's brought back in a little bit later, and you don't really know what to expect. And the fact that he was so unstable throughout it and could have killed one of them earlier, and you're like, whoa, it just adds this alarming weirdness to everything that happens. And you know, it's also like, okay, how many people has he pulled over from the side of the road in the same way? Like, how long has he been walking on this crazy road?
Yeah, you could definitely see that wasn't her motive. She wasn't there like...
Well, she's just like trying to get away. And like, she's whatever she's faced is so scary that she's just going to shoot herself. Which is like...
But she was clearly very popular. Like, they had photos of her in a jar, kind of like preserved, and everyone knew her. Somehow people got a hold of her baby. Like, even the kid who was in the ring, the little Jedediah guy, like, knew who she was. So it's hard to tell if she was a member of the family or if she was just passing through and she was also a victim.
It changes like the dynamic of like where the family's from too, because you get the feeling that they're just inbred super mutants.
It's much more Hills Have Eyes than the original. The original is only 4 of them, all male, you know, question mark next to Leatherface. But in this one, it's like wherever you run, you're going to get a cousin of this Hewitt family.
Which is sort of a combination of like Texas Chainsaw 1 and 2, like where they're like and that sort of gives you the feeling like, okay, this was built for there to be sequels, and you know, I'm surprised that there kind of weren't more, because the movie made money. It was fine. The weird little prequel made money. It was fine. Like,
the prequel actually, I think, to circle kind of back to this. Why was this set in the 70s? I think the prequel did a much better job about setting it in that time.
Yeah.
It's a worse movie. Some really good deaths, though. That girl being yanked out of the truck by that hook. Just all driving away. All like, have we not seen the beginning? Texas Chainsaw, the beginning?
That's the prequel to this one.
It came out after, probably 2006.
Yeah, who's in it?
Everybody.
Maybe not.
Who's in the first one?
Not the Matthew McConaughey one.
No, that's way back when with Renee Zellweger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's no good. Speaking of deaths, there are 2 things that got edited out of the final version that was weird. One is...
How do you know that? Did you buy the DVD?
No, it's on YouTube.
Oh, okay.
When one of the characters gets chainsawed up the crotch.
Morgan.
Yeah, they don't really show you because it was going to be too much.
Right.
And apparently in the original version, the kid gets killed. The kid gets offed, but it's too much. And as we've talked before, Chad, like, it seems like you can actually finally kill kids in horror movies now.
Well, I thought, but there's a moment, I mean, a notable exception would be the newer Jamie Lee Curtis Halloween. There's a moment when there should have been a child death and there isn't. And to me, it was very disappointing. It felt like the movie being weak.
Yeah.
I mean, why not?
You shot a hole through a girl's head.
Yeah. And then they don't show much more.
Yeah.
I mean,
like, it's
really.
It's funny that they chose to go light in other ways.
I always wonder about those moments because, like, okay, who is
with
this
with a gun she pulled out of her vagina.
Yeah, like who is this moralizing for? This one decision. Like, you're gonna lose moms on this movie? Come on, like, it's ridiculous.
Yes,
you know.
They killed a kid in House that Jack built. Have you seen that yet?
No.
I watched like half of it and then fell asleep in it. Like, I was really expecting to be way more excited by it.
Yeah, me too.
And it's kind of, I mean, it literally put me to sleep. I thought it was kind of a nice looking movie, and I think the acting is very good. It's just, I don't know. Sometimes when I sit down to watch a movie, I want to see like a crazy murder, you know, or some crazy new film technique that allows you to see how somebody's head explode from a new way. Like, that's like a different way of looking at these horror movies. And I just felt like it was too film school for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious what you guys think of. I want to talk about the idea of Final Girl, which you know, the original was so much a part of creating that iconic horror cinema trope. And tying it back to what you were saying earlier, Chad, and we've talked about several times before about when you've got an attractive cast and it's unreal, it's the way it affects your sympathies, the way it affects your enjoyment of a horror movie. How do you guys feel it changes the final girl if she is Hollywood hot versus
And Hollywood
plain Jane?
famous.
Or Hollywood famous too. Yeah, that's true too. Versus like Hollywood plain Jane. Because the whole idea about the final girl, so much of it is about our identifying with her. And she is the protagonist, and she is actually the one who takes us on this journey through this film. And so her being, I don't know how else to put this, but like one of us, you know, as like a real person versus like hot and just an object that the camera is, it's purely about the camera's gaze on her body. That's very, very different from, let's say, Halloween or the original Chainsaw, you know? Do you guys feel like that changes things much?
Yeah, I mean, you have all of the slasher players here. You have all of them, and she's supposed to fit the final girl. But yeah, I mean, there's just something like so completely unrelatable to her because you know exactly who she is. And Jessica Biel is funny because like from Chainsaw, she's primarily just been in horror movies. Like she was in that movie The Tall Man. She was in the first season of The Sinner, which is amazing. She produced it. Second season is awful. Have we seen The Sinner?
No.
It's good. Bill Pullman. But I haven't seen a good final girl since the 70s or 80s. I think that's like what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, maybe it follows, but they kind of all survive, so it's hard to...
Neve Campbell in the Scream movies.
Yeah.
Pretty great.
But again, that's more like meta. But she's great.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you should say that because I was also thinking of the redhead from
Cabin in the Woods.
Cabin in the Woods,
Yeah.
but that's also meta, so that can't count either because they're... I feel like there must be one, but I can't think of one.
I mean, no one's made a good slasher, a good original slasher lately.
That isn't meta? Is that true? Fuck.
When was the last
I wish I came
time?
prepared with...
No, I mean, yeah. I mean, I did, but they're all remakes.
There's got to be some like Swedish movie,
Right, yeah.
Or
They
something,
do a
you
good
know,
job,
they're
but
like-
it's usually like a minimal cast. The Descent was great. But see, that even still wasn't shortly after this remake.
Right.
What about the movie that we looked at, the Stalker movie? That was all shot on the iPhone.
Oh, Unsane?
Unsane, yeah.
Right.
I mean,
I don't know if
vaguely
she's, I don't know if she's
slasher-ish.
not a...
I
Yeah.
don't think she's a final girl, though, because she is kind of the only girl.
Yeah.
She's the only one. As opposed to a cast where we're watching a procession of murders down to one last.
Right, like when the whole
female.
aim is to of the film is to just check the cast down to
Yeah,
like the
to
last
take the
person.
Scooby Gang down to Daphne, basically.
And how are we going to invert it? Is the black guy going to die second? Is the slutty girl going to be the final girl?
Right,
Like,
right.
and what, like with the remake of Chainsaw, it's like the hitchhiker is going to be a girl. The person that gets hung on a hook is going to be a guy. We're going
Right.
to like invert like everything you think you know about this movie in a way where it's not radical at all.
Well, I guess to be fair, maybe there is no way to do a slasher movie at this point that isn't meta, because what are you going to do? Like, are you really going to rehash? Because if you do rehash those tropes out yet again, it's either going to have to be so self-aware that it is just meta by nature, or it's just a tired... Is it Follows? And that's not a slasher, but is she a final girl?
Totally.
Ish?
I would call her that. Yeah.
Okay, that's...
I mean,
that movie is so good. I rewatched it recently.
Yes, it is.
You've covered it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, I think that was like our second episode or something.
yeah, when it looked like movies were going to be more like that. And then that
I mean,
moment just passed.
we're still getting our good horror movies, a handful each year. And it's funny, like you said you saw the original Suspiria just a few years ago.
Yeah.
The remake of Suspiria was my favorite movie last year.
Oh, yeah?
Easily.
I still haven't seen it.
Really?
I totally missed it.
It's,
they've done a good job keeping it off of places to steal it. Otherwise, I would have seen it by now.
It's a beautiful, beautiful, well done piece of work.
Cool.
And it's like, and that's another thing with remakes, and we can see this in the Chainsaw universe where it's like, you're making this movie and it has Texas Chainsaw kind of attached to it, but then it turns out to be a prequel, or it turns out to be a remake, or it turns out to be a sequel. You like this whole idea of like, we're going to just take this and make it something, how they decide whether or not to add to the story.
Yeah.
Because like the Suspiria remake, I would consider it a remake and even a reimagining, because it's so far from the original, but still has some like connectors. But trying to think of like a modern remake that's just ended up, or like The Thing, right? So like The Thing from Outer Space, I think, was the 50s, and then we get John Carpenter's The Thing, and then we get the Mary Elizabeth Winstead iteration 2010 or something, but it's a prequel. So it's a prequel to the John Carpenter one.
Yeah.
So it's like, is it a remake, or is it just, again, this production company knowing that they'll make money off of this? And
Yeah, I like seeing more of a universe. Like, I like people like unfolding the shadows, or like shining a little more light into like a universe more than like redoing a thing. So I tend to like prequels that are newer and fresh, like the Star Wars prequels and stuff. I think they're like, I love Rogue One. Like, I not like the prequels with Anakin Skywalker. Those are terrible. I mean, like non-primary storyline pieces of a franchise. Like I think The Conjuring kind of does it okay. Like it expands its franchise out a little bit. Like I like that a little bit more than like redo the storyline again and again and again. It's like they never allow themselves to get too far away from the movies. Like, when people do Hamlet, it's like, okay, this is a version of Hamlet where everybody's a samurai. Great. Here's a version where it's like 1940s Russian spies. Awesome.
Have they done that?
Yeah, they do all kinds of crazy shit with with Hamlet. Like, they have this. I wish that like people would treat franchises a little bit more like that.
Yep.
And then
do you mean you wish your slasher films took place in outer space sometimes?
Sometimes, yeah. Or like allowing these things we like to just see them in totally new and different ways.
Yes.
And even though I hate cartoons, I think a franchise that does this really well are all the weirdo animated Batman movies that are like, hey, here's Batman, and it's just like Batman gas lamp. And you're like, oh, it's just
made out of Legos.
Yeah. I just like that. And I feel like horror could learn from Batman, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe it's not interesting, but
It's funny. It sounds like your description of what you appreciate in remakes is what a lot of people hate specifically about remakes, that they're often these prequels. And it really is the Jar Jar Binks phenomenon. And Patton Oswalt has this whole thing about that. Just like, I don't want to know how the thing I like got to be the thing that I like. I just want the thing that I like. And it's definitely an issue that a lot of people take with Rob Zombie's Halloween, which is like, you're making him less scary the more you let us know what's inside his head. Mm-hmm. But that's not necessarily true. It's just a very common criticism that I kind of agree with. But
Yeah.
I liked the look of that Halloween.
I just like how violent it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, just give me a good fucking slaughter. So I did a bunch of research while I was sitting on the toilet, actually. Texas Chainsaw was really like the first like post-aughts remake with like a big name attached to it. Like the only one that like predated it post 2000 was Carrie. It was 2002. It was made for TV. I don't know if we've seen it.
Wait, who was the big name in Chainsaw?
Oh, Chainsaw is the big name.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So like remaking these movies that are they're on horror nerds top 5 lists, and they're like, okay, let's remake all of these. I think it's also interesting that Michael Bay produced the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake,
Yes,
and also the Amityville Horror remake, which is almost the exact same. Talking about like a sexy cast, like Ryan Reynolds.
And then, another movie that has like a really similar look to these movies is the first Transformers movie and the new Bumblebee movie. They both had this sort of like hazy, nostalgic 70s Americana, but sort of darker feel to it. And that to me is like a real Michael Bay look. And as corny as that dude can be, like the effects of his films, I always get the feeling he's a real deal fan of this shit. Like you can tell he probably is like tickled to make a Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie.
Yeah. It's like, someone tells you not to like somebody and then you just don't. I've never really kind of given any thought to Michael Bay. I just kind of push him aside, being like, he's just this guy that I've seen made fun of on South Park, and I don't need to know anything about him. But I mean, he is kind of like always on the periphery of like things that I like. So
he made Explosions even bigger.
Yeah.
Whatever. It's what's awful about Spielberg. I think that something else that really flattens this movie, which incidentally took place in 1973, apologies, is the framing device of the found footage. Like they were trying to pull a Blair Witch and using the John Larroquette narration at the top and tail, and it didn't add anything. First of all, the opening text sort of doesn't make sense. It's actually really bad writing. Like they were dead, but if they didn't die, they could not have imagined how awful it would be.
Right.
That's not writing. That is total fucking nonsense. How did that get past anybody? But then the footage, like, it was all buried until this footage, and then they just show someone going into a basement, and that's how they set this movie up
with like very unnatural claws into the walls, where it's like human fingers could not do that.
Right.
But then later we get the guy with his fingernails sliding off as he
But it's this weird framing device where it's sort of, again, this, well, they're referring to the trope of early horror movies saying this is a true story, and they're referring to that Chainsaw was based on Ed Gein, but this movie is referring to the movie Chainsaw in this lazy way, and it's not really, it doesn't actually bring us in any deeper. It's just sort of this framing device that feels very lazy, and
they're trying to date it just
but it doesn't really, because they don't do anything with it.
I don't know. I think in the original, like that crime scene flash photography is so compelling and scary and weird, and it's not doing the same thing in the remake. It doesn't like even connect up with the story too much, right? Like the fact that they find all this stuff and they find this footage, it doesn't like inform the story later on. Like, because in the fact that they're looking for the graveyard where all this shit happens, and that's why they're in the area, connects the plot in the original, and it's just doing something different. And you're like, well, what is it doing? Like, I don't know why it looks good. Like, I think that footage looks pretty decent, but. Yeah.
The kind of emaciated body on the...
Yeah, it's just creepy looking.
I'm curious. I have this like weird... So I went through all of the remakes that came out post 2002, and I've kind of broken them into categories that are remakes that actually are better than or equal to the original. Something like Hills Have Eyes. I think the Hills Have Eyes remake was actually incredible.
It's really good.
Yeah. Let's say also the Evil Dead remake. Not bad.
It's not bad.
Some of it was fine. Last House on the Left was pretty much verbatim, but
it's pretty good. Those movies I think about, like if you showed them to audiences on the same day at the same time, like back then, which movie would people prefer? And I think a movie like that, like you would prefer the newer one. It's just a better constructed movie,
right?
And I think like because remakes, there was like a big resurgence of remakes in like the 70s, but that was all movies that were made in the 50s where it was all black and white and they didn't have the proper special effects and stuff. Like, I guess Blob was like 80s, or
The Fly.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers,
Was
The
later,
Fly, the Thing from Outer, The Thing.
Yeah. I think Dawn of the Dead.
Oh, Dawn of the Dead is top of the list.
It's on your list. Okay.
But that's also a year later than Chainsaw. So like there was the Carrie made for TV 2002, and then there was Chainsaw 2003, and then after that the ball just goes rolling. Amityville Horror, Black Christmas, The Fog, Halloween, Hitcher, House of Wax, Hills Have Eyes, Dawn of the Dead.
I liked House of Wax.
Oh man, I liked House of Wax too. Fucking Paris Hilton.
Paris Hilton.
That was an amazing
Death.
Yeah. And also a really not bad story about the killers. I think that was a really good one, kind of like going back to what you were saying about like too much information on the killers is gonna, make the film worse. But this was a weird... That was a good one for me.
Yeah.
And also, like, and I, again, am just dating myself as an infant here, but there was definitely a difference between like PG-13 remakes and R-rated remakes.
Oh.
Like when A Stranger Calls, when that came out, that was like lumped into just any other shitty, like whatever Paranormal Activity jumped onto, like
Right.
thing where you would go out and, drink too much pop and watch this like scary movie with no blood or anything. PG-13s or When a Stranger Calls, The Fog. Ooh, My Bloody Valentine was the first 3D remake.
It was all right.
Yeah, it wasn't bad. Yeah. But you know what was great? Piranha 3D the next year.
Really? I saw the original, but not the remake.
Oh my God, the remake is
in 3D.
so
It's like
good.
it's kind of a fun movie.
It's so fun.
It's yeah, it knows what it's doing, and
it embraces
Great.
it embraces how silly it is.
I mean, we're not even talking about cultural remakes, like
That's-
remaking J-horror and
yeah.
stuff like that. There's so many, or Scandinavian, or
Yeah.
whatever. Definitely, that's another whole machine.
Yeah, and then
That
what is
people
that?
have-
Is it a remake or is it a
Translation.
translation?
Yeah. Sometimes it feels like one, and sometimes it feels like the other. Like Funny Games is clearly, literally a translation because it's
And so
shot
was
for shot
Psycho.
by the same director. That was a weird one, though. That was, I feel like, even though it's a literal translation, it is also an homage, because it felt almost like a conceptual exercise
Wow.
to do literally a shot for shot version of something that,
It's so iconic.
yeah, which is very different from the director of Funny Games doing an English version that's almost shot for shot,
if you guys were gonna redo a horror franchise, like you got to pick one and you could do whatever you wanted to with it, what do you think you'd pick, and how?
Final Destination.
Final Destination.
Yeah, absolutely.
And would you veer towards being like true to it, or what would you do to be different?
I would make it so unbearably awful. Awful. What? No, I would make it so. I would make the deaths so painful and so gory and so realistic. Like, Final Destination is like the dominoes fall and hit this piece of paper that flies across the room, and now you're drowning.
Yeah.
But like mine would be like just straight up like the worst possible thing that could keep you in agony for 10 minutes that's just in your kitchen. I don't know.
That's great.
Yeah, but that's another thing with Final Destination, which is my favorite franchise. Final Destination 3 is probably my favorite movie. Okay, you guys can have me back. We can talk about Final Destination
Love to.
3. I think the Final Destination franchise is so... It was, originally... The concept was originally Twilight Zone, picked up by X-Files, picked up by New Dimension, or I don't know who produced it. But it's I kind of like thinking about it as like capitalism turning against us. Like we have all this stuff, right? We're like buying all this stuff, but all this stuff is like kind of falling on top of each other, and then it ends up somehow creating a noose and somehow putting that noose around your neck.
Yeah, a lot of the deaths happen. Someone goes to a place for services,
Yeah.
and those services turn against them.
Yeah, it's just like, what is something you've always been uncomfortable doing, and how can you die doing it?
I had a what I think is a really good Final Destination, let's say 6 or Final Destination 0 idea, which it would be kind of like Inception. So the person is having the flashback and then prevents the deaths, and then the deaths happen anyway, but then that was actually a flashback, or that was
Right.
actually a premonition.
Right.
So the person has to then prevent all of those deaths from happening that were actually a premonition of fate, undoing the damage of the premonition within the premonition.
Yeah. And I'm also just like
Can
straight
you help me fund it?
up. If anyone, and I'm really serious right now, to anyone who listens that maybe works in Hollywood, that maybe knows anybody who's interested in making a new Final Destination movie, please put me on the team. I've already written my own. I was 14 when I wrote it. But I think they should just do like a straight up prequel, like set in like the witch times. Like
See, that's
where
the-
this all started. Like, can you imagine like a blacksmith death?
Absolutely.
Or like, and the people just died from like a barn burning down, or like,
But the thing about the Final Destination thing is it's sort of like a sitcom. Like what happens in a sitcom? Well, Jack Tripper misunderstands something that Chrissy said, and antics ensue. And you know what you're going to get, and you love the format or you don't. You're on board or you don't, and you love the flow. That's what slasher films are. You know, do you love the format or do you not? In Final Destination, it's at a racetrack. Or
that's that one. We don't talk about that one.
I love that one. Or
Why?
It's a roller coaster. Like, the thing is, it totally doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Hey, did you hear the new Final Destination? It takes place in 1400s. You
Yeah.
know, like, great, I'm there.
see, I'm 1 foot in that door and then 1 foot. And that's the funny thing too about like, when did the Friday the 13th god awful remake come out? 2009. That was, you have all of these Jason X. When do the sequels stop and when does the remake start?
Right.
You know, how much time do you need? 20 years or at least 5 years between the last sequel and the
I say
first remake?
Go brave. Be like Spider-Man. Like we had one last month. Fuck it. New Spider-Man. Like,
I
bring it.
heard that movie's great.
I think
Into the Spideyverse
I
or
think that, well, you know, Into the Spider-Verse is supposed to be incredible.
Yeah.
Like it's supposed to be this super wild, weird meta movie. Everybody who likes movies and cares about them and talks about them a lot was really a fan. I think it was like the Popcorn Piss and Vinegar guys, their favorite movie of the year.
Wow.
And it's just really odd and interesting. But I was thinking about like, oh, you could have like all these different types. You could, you know, Ren Fair, Final Destination, or whatever.
Yeah.
I was thinking, did you read Her Body and Other Stories?
Not yet. It's sitting right
like
next
Carmen
to me.
Maria
I think.
Machado. I can remember her name, but the bulk of that book is just a series of short descriptions of imaginary Law and Order episodes in like a fucked up, weird, like William Burroughs Cthulhu universe of conspiracy. And you could almost write like a book that was like that was just aphoristic length deaths that you just came up with. I mean, I think you could just be like, that's the whole thing. You could just constantly be writing that. That could be like its own blog or something.
Is that sort of your answer to the what would you want to reboot?
Oh, no.
Did you answer that question?
No, I didn't answer it.
Do you have an answer, Chad?
I answered
yeah.
Final Destination. If anyone is making a new Final Destination film, please put me a part of it.
Yeah, you could
Really,
be like,
honestly, my phone number will be in the notes. I don't know. Yeah.
yeah, if we have anybody of that caliber, please let us know in our audience. But I think probably you might be able to get hooked up with like some free coffee someplace or some paint for your car.
Yeah.
I don't know that our listeners have too many more services to offer.
What would you remake?
I would do Monster Squad, but all the monsters, instead of being classic monsters, would all be like 80s monsters. So like Freddy Krueger, Jason, all that stuff.
That's great.
And the kids, instead of being suburban kids, they'd be like corner boys from The Wire. And so it would be more of like this like sort of like inner city Monster Squad, but like way more fucked up. Like I definitely want like an NC-17 rating for it, even though there's kids. Like it would just be super fucked up, like full on wild, like a wild fucked up movie where just bad shit happens and like just full of references. But it would be like almost like a weaponized nostalgia movie, but just really zany. I think that's what I would do. Probably make no money at all. Yeah.
It's not a franchise, but I would do The Blob. I think that there's a lot of potential with a formless shape, especially if that formless shape could be something more like the remake of The Mist. No, The Mist wasn't a remake. The Mist. If the Blob could somehow be Lovecraftian, if you took the monsters, if you took the Yog-Sothoth out of Lovecraft and were just left with this creeping dread, and that creeping dread was a formless pile of matter, I think that it could speak to not like climate change in some sort of political sense, but climate change in a more sort of like literal, what are we doing on this earth sense? So that there is, earth, air, fire, and water and blob. What is this alternate form that we have no way of understanding that is part of the earth?
What if it
and
was
it's
like
destroying us?
What if it was like a new elemental god? So there was like earth, air, water, fire, and now like trash. And it was like this meta creature.
Well, I mean, I'm sort of thinking like that.
You have like
but
trash
it's
witches, like witches that only...
you just ruined it. You ruined everything.
Can you afford Heclina
What?
as the Blob?
Oh my God, I'm totally not including that in this episode.
Shots fired.
Anyway, I just think like, what could be more horrifying than something that is just pure gore and pure the malevolence of the, we talk about the malevolence of the forest. The forest just wants to kill you. Well, what about something that is like that will, but it moves and it takes any form?
Very It Follows.
Kinda, right? Yeah, with less fucking.
There have been some bad horror remakes, but it's also like, should we talk about not horror remakes? I mean, no, maybe not, but
I mean, genre stuff I think would be worth talking about.
it's also just like, where are we as filmmakers? Like, are we at the end of the rope? Is it just remakes and things based off of comic books or books from now on? Or
I think that I basically have an argument that no new music has been made since auto-tune. Like we have literally not heard a new sound.
right.
There has not been a new timbre to hit the human ear since auto-tune. Pretty much. That's a little arguable, but it's pretty much true. And music has been in this retro recycling thing. And that's sort of a fact. That's not just there's no new good music. There's plenty of new good music. It's just not new and innovative and something you've not heard before. And that's partly the tools we have not evolved in a way that allows us to develop new sounds. It's developed ways of sharing and accessing information, and that's made everything a lot more democratic. I think that filmmakers finding new properties to create narratives around, there's been the comic book explosion, and that's getting way beyond stale, and the horror remake. Like, there's always this cycling through of where do we get our stories, what's hot now. And at some point, it's going to run out of steam. It's sort of like the thing of there's rock and roll, and then you fuse rock and roll with classical music, and you get prog. You fuse rock and roll with traditional African music, and you get funk. But eventually, you're going to run out of countries to colonize, and you can't do that game anymore. And film is sort of going to have to hit that wall at some point. It's sort of going through video games slowly. Like that's already been happening, but it might happen more and more and more.
Yeah.
But it's also sort of fusing with video games because video games are getting increasingly like movies. Like Bandersnatch is actually a good example of how those are fusing.
I think we'll probably start seeing a lot more like genre-inspired
Virtual reality.
Well, I mean, that for sure. I mean, who knows what that'll... I mean, they've been talking about us having that forever, but I think that'll probably look more like Bandersnatch style entertainment, where it's just like the narrative is just really dialed up on this new type of immersive video game. But I think like in the way that the Haunting of Hill House or whatever is like This Is Us, but with ghosts. I think you'll see what used to be normal like family dramas, and they'll still exist, but they'll have like this spiciness added. Like, okay, it's about two women raising a child alone in this world, but the kid's a werewolf. Like I think you'll see like that type of shit.
Or we'll make Bird Box, which is totally not A Quiet Place, and it's totally not Hush.
Right.
It's Bird Box or The Road. You know that Roger Ebert gave the Texas Chainsaw remake a 0?
Nice.
Yeah, I was reading about him. It was interesting, like how off he was on stuff. Like people like kind of like canonized him a little bit, like he was so great or whatever. But it's kind of fun. Like people, like websites will do it every once in a while. They'll do like a top 10 movies that Roger Ebert hated, but they were like great. And you're like, huh, weird.
Yeah. He has gone back on a lot. He's reevaluated things to his credit, you know.
I mean, what was our favorite part of the 2003 Chainsaw? I mean, what was the strongest element of it that was introduced that was not in the first one?
The bed sheets.
Oh, okay.
Shot.
I think Leatherface was a lot scarier. I mean,
In this one?
just like more
There's more brutality. There's like a scarier creature.
right. It's not like a quiet. I mean, Leatherface already kind of broke new ground, and he actually did. I'm so stupid. He like did this before Jason or whatever. But he's a serial killer that runs, right? And we didn't see that really until I don't know, Dawn of the Dead. I guess like the fisherman from I Know What You Did Last Summer kind of ran, but like he's kind of like a serial killer slasher film adjacent. The fact that he's just like this pig that just runs at you and you really have to run, and that's why you'll trip and you're in the middle of nowhere and everyone's out to eat you.
Right.
But in this one, I think like it bothered me that we could see his face. I think it bothered me that he was like a little too stylized, but all the queerness was lost.
Yeah. I think that this isn't quite your question, but I think that what this film did is it contributed to opening doors for something like Rob Zombie's House of a Thousand Corpses was also made in 2003. So same year. But I think that this movie introduced a sort of promise of how horror movies can start to become. Again, that MTV-ness that Rob Zombie really manifest. Wait, was Devil's Rejects 2003? Am I getting that right?
I would put it a little after 2003.
Yeah, it's gotta be
I'd probably
later.
do it 05.
Or am I thinking House of a Thousand Corpses? I'm sorry.
Thousand Corpses
Thousand
probably,
Corpses,
yeah.
2003. I meant
Which is so similar to the Chainsaw world.
yeah. So anyway, so Rob Zombie was totally going for it.
Right.
But I feel like this movie opened the door to those sort of aesthetics getting more fully into horror films, which made it interesting. I didn't think it did it enough. I don't think it had enough vision to really deliver on what its potential was.
Well, they definitely showed that you could put a star in a movie and make it look slick, and then horror would make some money, and which I think is like probably pretty good for everybody involved in horror. Was this movie being successful?
Fair.
Thousand Corpses or...
Oh no, I mean this Texas Chainsaw remake, because it made a bunch of money.
It had like I read this like a $10 million budget, and they made somewhere around 160 million.
Yeah.
Huge, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, the first one was financed by the mob, and no one got any money from it for like years.
And nobody really knows how much money it made because the money has largely gone beyond taxes. So the original.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a bunch of the original movie. There's like a bunch of weird shit, and I think the myth of the first movie is what is really so special about it too. It's like when you hear about an album that was made in like really crazy circumstances. You know, like everything was shot and the whole album was recorded in one day, and everybody was on angel dust the whole time. Like it has that feel. Like there, the things like the woman's finger getting actually cut in the scene where her finger gets cut because they couldn't get the thing to work. And it's just, there's just so much about this movie. It's like a Black Flag album or something. I mean, it's just cool. And I feel like remakes, like slick remakes, will always have the feel of the band getting back together. Like there's like that feel, and that's not a good feeling for anyone.
But it's also like horror post-aughts, in general, I guess, is like where actors that we love now first started. Like Elijah Wood, right, was in The Faculty or whatever, and
Oh yeah, a lot of people.
Yeah,
got their
so
a
like-
lot of directors
horror,
cut their teeth on horror movies.
So you have and it just screams inauthentic because you just have these, you can tell kids getting their like first role and they're not relatable in that way.
Yeah.
Like they're again just like too pretty. They just like did well in their casting call.
You know what though? Like Cabin in the Woods has the same thing going on. Like the whole cast is attractive, but it's fun for that movie. But I guess it's because it's just making fun of it. It's like Scream. And then also the people who work for the company or whatever look like schlubs, like effectively. So they're like not too hot. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, that movie, I guess the character actors are weird looking, which is enough. Like at the very least, the weirdos that you run into should look like weirdos in a horror movie. I don't know why I keep getting so hung up on that, because it's not like I mind it at all. Like I think when you were asking like what's the thing you think is most successful in this movie, I just you never get tired of looking at Jessica Biel in this movie. I mean, she's attractive in like in a way that's fun for horror through the whole thing. And
well, that's I mean, again, that is straight like sort of the strongest part of the movie, and it's not. I'm not necessarily saying the best part of this remake is Jessica Biel's ass in those jeans. More that this movie, a lot of it is actually about the gaze. Like horror movie is often about the gaze, but this reminds me of, Daniel Kaufman has these questions to like approach things with. And one of them is whose perspective is privileged. Mm-hmm. And this is one of those films. Well, most horror films, the male gaze is privileged. But I feel like in this film, that is true in two ways. One is your gaze is on Jessica Biel as this like hot Hollywood body. But also, there is so much peering in this movie. There's like Leatherface peering through the curtains. There's the kid peering through the rough slats of wood. People are always watching each other and looking. And then there is also, though it's different, the way it looks. It's got a unique look. It doesn't have a vision. It doesn't have a great art direction or anything like that. But it did sort of like slick up in a way that not a lot of horror movies had quite done yet. That again, like I said earlier, Rob Zombie really fucking took to the next level.
Yeah. It's also like this time was like peak women's butt in jeans. You know, like this was
totally.
Like,
it was MTV.
Yeah, like also just sort of like 7 jeans, like jeans that were specifically engineered to make people's butts look better. Mm-hmm. You know, and it just thinking about this is like such a butt movie. Like, I mean, it's kind of funny, but it really is. Like, I mean, that's like those slow shots of her. Yeah. And, you know, you think about like who's gay.
I don't see any of those when I watch it. It's so funny how gay people are. I do love Pepper, though.
She's great.
She's good.
Yeah.
God, that death is good with the feathers flying everywhere.
True.
Butt movie. Yeah.
Yeah. Where are we? Anybody else got anything?
I am excited for the Candyman remake.
Is that coming out?
Yeah, it's
what else is coming out? Pet Sematary.
Pet Sematary.
That's also something like talking about Carrie, talking about Pet Sematary. I mean, these are all Stephen King. Talking about, you know, if you're working from a text that already exists, is that a remake or is that an iteration?
But, and then in the case of Stephen King too, you're kind of working with like this giant meta text, like this idea of Stephen King, because that's like what Stranger Things is.
It is interesting. The Flatliners remake just came out. Jesus, so people are remaking 90s movies now?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, is The Faculty going to be next?
I've seen
I'd be fine with that.
I've seen so many of my friends' kids that are like just beginning to dress themselves age, referring to their look as like 90s hippie grunge. Like, and they're basically, it's like a...
Which is 70s.
Yeah, it's basically they're wearing like they look like kids from 70s movies, but the t-shirts are 90s bands. Like, so it'll be like a Nirvana shirt, but like a plaid shirt or whatever. So, I mean, we could probably see in the way that there's like an affection for 70s horror. I'm for sure there's going to be like a specifically 90s horror boom. I mean, we're already kind of in it.
I think that the burnout hippie thing, something that is interesting. This is another sort of iteration of the difference between hot people in horror movies and regular looking people in horror movies is the original Chainsaw. They weren't hippies, wide eye, optimistic, gonna change the world. They were 70s kids. They were just like, they fucking
derelicts.
Lost. The world is not for them anymore. It was a bad time to be that age. And then the remake is a bunch of like super hot, proactive,
Muscles,
actors.
all the guys
Yeah,
have muscles.
I wonder-
exactly.
I
And well, the thing I was going to say is, I mean, that is such a factor of the original Chainsaw that I think doesn't get discussed too much. Is there's obviously a lot to say about how real it is, and that, you know, that it's violent without showing violence and all that. But having a bunch of protagonists that are just sort of these, like, I don't want to romanticize it, but they're sort of these lost souls. It's this era where being that age was it was very in between.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't a generation that was coalescing really in America, and that movie really captured that in a certain way. And I'm wondering if there are any horror movies currently or for the last while that captures, I mean, It Follows, I think, but captures a sort of like a current version of ennui, of let's say like millennial ennui, not proactive, go get 'em, tech savvy, like, oh my God, am I popular enough on Instagram? I mean, like genuine, like, what is it like to be lost in this moment and be young?
I think people need to just completely invert that and make a movie where it is a young millennial as the killer killing elderly people. And it's like a handful of elderly friends that are being picked off one by one.
Damn it, that is so good.
That's good, right?
Fuck your Final Destination.
Yeah.
Do that. That's
It's just,
awesome.
Just Miriam and...
Oh my God.
I mean, I kind of can't
The
think of...
Scooby Gang is all like silver-haired boomers. Oh my God, totally.
The Visit was good.
What if there was like a Scooby gang that had just learned so much about murder that they had like peered too long into the darkness and they decided to become the murderers themselves?
Great.
They just went from town to town, like engineering a death in their Scooby van, just
That would be
doing
a
crazy
good
shit.
series. Again, it's sort of like an inversion of the X-Files.
Yeah, you
Just
would
go
be
town to town, fuck shit up.
making the mayhem, like instead of
Wow, yeah.
What if you're a bird watcher, but you just watch that one bird?
that's like owning a bird, right?
No.
You just have a pet.
Oh, yeah?
Like, that's my bird. I feed him seeds.
So we got a bunch of emails that we should catch up on.
Did we?
Here, and and please chime in because I think there's sort of a lot of suggestions actually.
Right, yeah.
Kristen Butcher suggested that we should cover speaking of remakes and whether it's actually a remake, The Haunting of Hill House, which is the new Netflix series based on the original text. And, it's been done before. I watched it. I liked it a lot. The last episode was really disappointing, but I think it would be worth covering. Have you guys seen it?
I've seen it. It lost me about halfway through.
Yeah.
Around the funeral.
Yeah.
I think the youngest sister's narrative just wasn't doing it for me or
Yeah.
something. I don't know what it was, but I was much more attracted to the mother. I was much more attracted to some of the siblings. But it wasn't until later when I was reading more about the production of it when I really fell in love with it. I was like, wow, there's ghosts almost in every shot in the background
Right.
that you just don't see.
Yep.
A lot of these are long shots that were really, hard to achieve, and they did it seamlessly. But it was almost a little too hallmarky for me. Like,
Yes.
yeah.
Totally. I feel like there's maybe a lot to talk about, though, and I think would be maybe worth doing an episode about. Not that I loved it, but that
None of
there's
it goes.
I
don't know. It was
could be a
nothing-
rich text.
Oh, what
No.
about this for a text? What if you did a really edgy, updated version of Touched by an Angel?
No,
What
But
is
it was,
that?
it was like a really cheesy Lifetime movie about like near death.
No, it was a
And-
series.
Yeah, it was a series.
Yeah.
It was just like
Oh, you don't know what Touched by an Angel is?
What about Sophie's Choice, but it's almond or soy milk?
wait, what?
That's the choice.
Darren Stoddard suggested we cover the new Halloween, the one that just hit streaming. Which should we do that? Is that
I thought there's things to talk about.
okay?
You know,
That's all I care about. I don't care if I like the movie. I just need to know that there's something to talk about.
Yeah, what I like about that movie is you have a what I would call like the post Terminator 2 like competent female protagonist that understands the threat and is sort of like hyper sane and how she deals with it and stuff like that. I think it's kind of interesting. I could definitely talk a lot about that
Okay,
movie.
let's put it in the queue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So deep now, that queue. It just keeps
Totally.
making fucking movies.
And Cameron Marquez made two suggestions. One is The Transfiguration, which I'd never heard of. I watched 10 seconds of the preview and was like, holy fuck, how have I not heard of this movie? And I didn't watch the rest of the preview because I didn't want to wreck
When
the
did it
movie
come
for
out?
semi recently. I'm definitely going to watch it soon, and then we can talk about whether to cover it. The other movie is Anna Biller's The Love Witch, which is one of my favorite movies. Have you seen it? The Love Witch?
Yeah, I have. It's local, right? Local filmmaker. Yeah.
She's amazing. I would love to cover that movie.
Very Stereo Argento.
Totally, right?
Aesthetic, yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of like a Radley Metzger movie, or sort of when Hammer Horror was doing sexy vampire movies. Mm-hmm. I'm a big fan.
I like both the ideas of those movies. I had really wanted to see and had completely forgotten about Transfiguration. It seems like a really interesting idea. It didn't get great reviews though, so I was kind of like a little gun shy on it. Like I was like really ready to like that movie, and The Love Witch I would love to see. I've just been looking for an excuse to watch it. I just haven't watched it yet.
It's fantastic.
Well, Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake didn't get great reviews, but
here we are.
Here we
there
are.
You go. What do you think we should cover?
I'm actually looking at my top 10 from last year. I don't know if it needs to be last year.
No, not at all. It can be anything.
But if it were, maybe Annihilation could be good. Mandy could be good.
We did Mandy.
So proud of you for doing Mandy. Thanks for doing that. I liked Annihilation a lot.
Yeah.
But then outside of last year, why not do like... What if it was like a true murder thing, like The Staircase or something?
What's The Staircase?
Where it like actually happened, like
do you mean a documentary?
Yeah, or something.
I'm totally game.
I would be interested to explore, did the West Memphis 3 kids kill those kids, and why do people think that they did or don't? Because that was another one of our email. We were going back and forth with somebody about like
with Jill,
with Jill about like, and then I haven't responded because I didn't want to be like, well, here is the articles related to your points. Well, here are the articles rebutting those points. Because like there's a lot of information, but like you got to be familiar with the West Memphis 3 and
the Robin Hood killings.
No,
Damien Eccles. There's
Paradise Lost. There's like 3 documentaries.
Yeah. Oh,
about
yes,
them.
yes.
Well, everybody cool and famous and celebrity was all about them being innocent, and so the 3 movies really make it look like they're innocent. I was pretty on board with them probably being innocent. And it just seemed like a perfect example of like the satanic panic and some people getting wrapped up into it. But as I started looking into like kind of more of the evidence that was not introduced into the documentary, I was like, man, this shit looks like these kids probably killed these kids.
Yeah. So rather than covering it, are they innocent or guilty, but rather talk about getting into rolling up your sleeves and getting lost in basically talking points. I mean, I feel like those murders are an amazing example of what's happening in media and news and fake news and people not trusting science or the government or whoever. There's so much mistrust of fact and professionals going on right now, but then any case you can look at it and find pro and con, and that's a perfect example. And
you can also find hard evidence in a lot of cases, and then it's interesting to me when people are presented with hard evidence, and it's like, at what point does your conspiracy mechanism in your own body shut down? Because it's like, well, they had this. Well, that is obviously wrong because of this, and it just keeps going. Like people don't trust. It's back to your thing about people not trusting experts anymore. Like people don't even trust expert testimony anymore. Yeah. And that's basically how it's witnessing and expert testimony. It's basically all you have to solve a crime. I would be keen to do Devil's Rejects.
Yeah,
would be a movie I would like to do an episode on.
Don't they have like a weird sequel? He's working on a sequel to...
Yeah, there's a new one coming out that has all those characters.
I've thought of 2 more. I really want you to do Final Destination, the first one.
The first one?
Yeah.
Great.
And also the Suspiria remake.
When it comes on video, I think there's kind of no question.
It's out.
Yeah, I used to
on digitally, I mean.
Yeah.
What?
It's on Amazon. It's 15. I mean, it's not rentable, but it's buyable.
Oh, it's buyable. Okay.
But it doesn't come with bonus features.
Right.
Like bullshit.
That's kind of
like, I don't...
Yeah, it's kind of whack.
I want to see deleted scenes because I watched the trailer. There are scenes in the trailer that are not in the movie.
Yeah.
And I want to know what's up with that.
Yeah.
Final Destination could be cool. Please invite me back for that. Maybe like wait a year. I don't know what our turnover is, but
yeah, you're gonna have to wait a year. Is that it?
You usually have some sort of zany question to end it out with. Some sort of.
Here's Mike. Okay, I got a question for you guys. The Chainsaw movies, at least the ones that I've seen, the family there's this family business and it's meat related, and that sort of covers up the crimes in some way. So if you were going to be a mass murderer of some form, whether solo, mobile, stationary, family, whatever, what would your murder business be? Like Sweeney Todd, like that sort of thing. What would be a good...
What job do you use to get rid of the bodies, basically?
Or meet new victims, or...
I'd probably be John Goodman from 10 Cloverfield Lane. Just make people think the world is ending and then throw them in a barrel of acid.
Yeah.
I mean, the pig farm thing is pretty solid.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason why it pops up in stories and movies all the time. Like being a wild pig farmer.
And it's real. There was just one in BC not that long ago.
Ew.
Like some mass murders. Yeah. Like missing prostitutes in Vancouver.
Ew.
Pig farm. It's still a useful way to dispose bodies. I
heard human flesh tastes more like lobster than anything.
Who told you this?
I just watched this documentary called Dead North.
It's about lobster.
Well, it's about people that kill... They killed people and then fed it to this person. He's like, it tastes like lobster.
Weird.
Or it had the texture of lobster, at least.
Yeah. I think owning a recycling place would be pretty good. Like if you had the big smelters, it'd be a good spot. But you also want to gain victims from it too.
I've always had this thought of like, what if you just owned a house and your welcome mat was actually like a sliding door and they just fell?
Just like a trapdoor.
Like really, really far down, and then it just closed, and then you just don't have to think about it ever again.
That's it.
This one would be super dark, but you could probably have this would be actually a really fucked up horror movie that would probably be really scary. But like if you had like a serial killer or something that ran like a battered women's clinic and just like preyed on people that like came there, like, you know, like, oh, say you have no family? Oh, really? And then that's like the person that like is like murderous.
Those are some of my favorite horror movies, like Sleep Tight. It's like this I've always wanted to do a double feature of Sleep Tight and The Pact. Have you seen The Pact? Like my probably favorite type of like non-gory horror movies are like there's this ominous threat, but it's real. There's like actually a guy living behind your walls. It's not like
Right.
Yeah.
Mark Steger.
Who's dating Jennifer Locke?
Yes.
Is that right?
Who did some choreography for Girl. You know this, right?
No.
I'm going to Disneyland with Mark Steger in 2 weeks.
Oh.
Yes. So the villain in the movie that he's talking about is a friend of mine.
It's a great movie. I can't wait to
really good.
meet him.
Yeah, he's great.
Because you're going to
will.
introduce me.
Yeah, you will.
Yeah. Okay, great.
I think what you were saying about a battered women's shelter is actually the reality of people who run homes for orphans. Like there's actually not necessarily murder, but I mean, it's sort of like the Catholic Church, right? It's built into that institution to prey upon the vulnerable.
If you were like a serial killer, like pedophile, and you ran like one of those missionary organizations in Africa, you could just like probably just murder. Like that's something I would like to see is like more foreign horror films like that aren't like that. They're a little more like culturally specific. Like I want to know
not
what,
so westernized.
Yeah, like I want to know like what really scares the shit out of somebody in Afghanistan, you know, other than drone strikes or whatever. But like or like how do fear of drone strikes manifest in
Or
a horror
a country
movie
no one ever thinks about. Like, what's their deal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was something interesting about Under the Shadow is that it's basically the Babadook in Iran, but the Babadook in Iran is a completely different fucking thing, right?
Yeah, his hat's cuter.
I think that you know, we've been increasingly discussing Netflix properties, and they're generally kind of mediocre. They're, you know, a lot of Netflix properties are...
They used to be good.
They were good for a minute, and some of them are, you know, they're turning out a lot of quality product. But one thing that they are doing is because it's this multinational company, that isn't trying to put butts in American seats and then try to leverage international money with, flying robots. They're able to fund foreign cinema and foreign TV shows. And so I feel like Netflix is actually responsible for doing some of this work we're talking about. I just watched The Ritual, which is...
Yeah.
Did you see it?
I did.
It's great. It's fun. And it's not perfect, but, I want to see Swedish
My favorite thing about The Ritual
monsters,
is the guy just being like, I wore the wrong shoes for this. Because it's such a real problem. It's like, not only are we lost in the woods, but I wore the wrong shoes for this. So, like, every step he takes is, like, just scraping into that blister.
Yep.
And then there are all these, like, cult members and this moose dragon that's trying to kill you. We're talking about the same movie, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Netflix is so weird to me because it's like they do two different things. On one hand, they have that sort of weirdness where it's like really creator forward. You get this really interesting kind of vision, but then they like algorithmically build shit. Like House of Cards was basically built with user data. They're like, okay, well, we like Kevin Spacey, and people who like Kevin Spacey like these kind of plots, and they like political thrillers, so we're going to make a movie like this. And so I think that will win out because that wins out in every industry.
God, that's so interesting.
Yeah, it's just
but when things are chaotic and they're trying shit out, that's when interesting things happen.
Right.
Before the accountants really can trace what's going on is often the most opportune moments to create art.
Yeah.
When the rules haven't quite been set, and I feel like Netflix is still trying to figure out what their rule book in this completely uncharted terrain is supposed to look like.
Yeah, that is the
Amazon
most fun.
too.
What's that?
Amazon too. They're producing
Yes.
good movies.
Yeah.
Like Suspiria, I love. You Were Never Really Here. I think that was also an Amazon film with Joaquin Phoenix. Neon Demon. They're all good, and they all kind of like don't have that second thought of, are we going to put butts in seats? Because yes, it'll come out in the theater, but it will always come out on Amazon.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I'm curious if it'll end up being like a net more experimental film or like a net more like homogenous.
Right.
Or we'll get the worst, which is like things that are actually homogenous but feel edgy.
That's what Stranger Things is.
Yeah, or even worse, like Bird Box is really more of that,
okay. Right.
Like I don't know why, but I give Stranger Things such a pass for some reason. Like I always give it a pass. Like even though I know it is all the things I would like complain about, like for some reason I don't know. It can do no wrong.
Stranger Things?
Yeah.
Yeah. Stranger Things season 1 is probably what the It remake tried to be, but failed.
I would like to see the third or fourth season of Stranger Things get really dark and just have those kids start dying. I think would be really interesting.
Or they're all like old and it's a few years later or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm really into this like elderly slasher.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, and also horror fans are getting older. It's sort of like mature. I always go back to rock and roll, but like rock and roll for older people, because older people are still listening to rock music.
Rock
you know what I mean? Like what's their version of that? Cinema can certainly do the same. Absolutely.
Dad metal.
Yeah.
It's today's youth. I'm far beyond that now. Just getting their horror from like Sabrina.
Oh, you mean kids?
Or yeah, like say I was 12 when I saw the trailer for Chainsaw remake.
Yeah.
What are they seeing?
Yeah, probably Sabrina.
Or those Unfriended films are actually pretty scary. Or
are they?
Yeah, the first one's not bad.
Yeah.
I wonder like what else, horror fans have always had like kind of a horror fan ecosystem of media. Like who's into horror that didn't like a Goosebumps book or even older, like a Hardy Boys book or something like that? I'm wondering if there's like newer versions of that stuff coming out.
I feel like we're in this kind of in-between space where...
But if we're talking about kids, is it not like creepypasta? Is it not like just purely online content?
Well, it would be online. I've never been on creepypasta, but I know that's where the Slenderman girls killed that girl.
So
yeah.
Thanks for having me back.
Thanks for coming back.
Yeah.
Always a pleasure.
I love coming.
Do you have anything to specifically plug coming up real soon or in general?
Yeah, sooner than...
It's also so random when people listen. Sorry to interrupt, but we get a big push of people listening right away, obviously, so it's good to talk about what's happening right now.
In the
But then again, this episode will probably have just as many listeners in 2 years as it does the day we post it, so who knows.
February 8th, I'm going to be performing at the Stud in this new event called Prissy. It's going to be a fashion night. Be good. I'm kind of like on the
what
fence.
is it? Tell me more.
It's a few good friends of mine, Jader, Skin, and Yves Saint Croissant, that are starting a new night at the Stud. And I don't have much information besides it's going to be fashion forward themed, kind of a variety show.
You Saint Croissant is a good name.
Isn't that
That's
great?
Really
Drag
solid.
names are so good. My favorite drag name that, no one's named this yet, Marble Mouth.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. You just perform with marbles in your mouth
Why don't you just do that?
and you sing live.
You don't always have to be Meredeath. You can do whatever the
Yeah.
fuck you want.
I'm actually kind of weirdly on the fence about drag right now.
Yeah?
That's like a whole other conversation, but
We'll have to talk about that.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm performing in drag-ish, quote
I
unquote.
respect when people are over the thing they do.
Yeah.
When's the next Stereo Argento? When are you and Jillian
It would
pulling up the
be
next
the
one?
last Friday in March 29th.
What's the theme?
Yet to be announced.
All right.
If anyone knows anyone making a Final Destination remake, please call me.
We'll remind them during our next
I'll be a
episode.
PA. I'll
too.
be anything. Just get me on set.
Is that the movie you would most want to be on the set of? If they were making a movie and you could be on the set of any movie that has ever been made, what movie would you be on the set of?
Is it a set or are they filming on location?
Your job is somewhere in between getting the coffee and holding the light up somewhere. Like you're like a production assistant. You get to see a lot, but maybe you're not so important to the movie. But
The
you
Descent.
Get to be the
I want to
Descent.
be in a cave.
It's not shot in a cave. It's all sound studio. Did you know that?
What?
Isn't that fucking mind blowing?
That
Like
is.
I
In a
listened.
sound studio.
It's all like studio shit.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not shot in crazy claustrophobic environments.
Have you done
at
The
all.
Descent?
No.
That's a great all-female cast.
Yeah,
you
it's
should
good.
do. Yeah, you should
Good
do
movie.
that. Yeah.
There's a lot of really smart shit said about that movie,
Right.
Which I think is the main reason why we haven't really delved
Yeah,
into
'cause
it
it's-
before.
anyways.
But there's a great interview with the director, and he had that statement, and they were like,
Is it Eli Roth? It's not. Probably.
No, it's somebody else. He might have produced it or something like that.
Statement what?
He talked about how the movie wasn't shot underground,
Oh.
and it really feels like it is. Like I was
yeah.
completely shocked by that.
Terrible.
Because the person interviewing was like, "Well, how did you do all this crazy shit?" And he's like, "In a studio," and it was kind of and that movie gets a lot of credit for being like a really positive feminist movie. And what I really appreciated about his answer was that he was just basically like, "I just wrote some good female characters, and they did intelligent things that were appropriate for the characters in a movie that had a good script."
It's not
And
that hard.
and that seems so obvious, but people can't even get to that as like the reason for feminism, right? But I also love that, it wasn't like agenda laden. It just happened to be made like
Yeah.
that because that was the obvious, like, good way to make things, which I think is cool.
Yeah.
That
It
movie's,
sold it.
yeah, like, I'm not a fan of being underground, and that movie is like,
Yeah.
it's
pretty
to watch.
tough.
Yeah.
I think for being on a set for me and this has nothing to do with what we've been talking about the whole time, but Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original, like, I think I would never, well, I'm vegetarian. I don't even like being around meat.
right.
I think it would be intolerable for me. I think it would be the worst experience of my life, but I think it's one of those, like, can you imagine if you were there? That would be amazing. It's sort of like if you were on set shooting Apocalypse Now, just misery, misery, misery. But if you were there, that is such a heavy, life-changing experience. And it would be so transformative because that movie was such a translation of a group of people enduring something, and it was caught on camera. What about you, Chad?
I'd like to be there when Kubrick faked the moon landing. I think that would be pretty badass.
That's good. Yeah, you win. You win. I haven't seen First Man yet, but you win.
All right. We'll see you next time for This Is the End. Watch it and hit us up at scarythoughts.org.
Probably watch Pineapple Express too. if you haven't already.
Why not?
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
We are not in a good jeans butt moment culturally now.